So what's going on guys, Kids here, and welcome back to a brand new video. For today we will look into the top 10 best free-to-play MMOs in 2024. I've gathered over 20 games that in the past 5 years I've played, some only for few hours and some for thousands of hours. And here they are ranked from best to worst, as all of these MMOs are completely free to play, so let me know down in the comments if you will be trying any of them out or if you're playing some already. And if this sounds interesting to you, then let's get right into it. So then for our first game we have Albion Online, and we will place it right in the S tier. Albion Online is a sandbox MMORPG set in an open medieval fantasy world. The game features a player-driven economy where nearly every item is player-crafted. Players can combine armor pieces and weapons suited to any playstyle in a unique, classless, so you are what you wear type of system. I've personally played this game on and off since 2017, and I even participated in all of the betas. Then I paid $30 when the game was buy to play, and now since already few years it's completely free to play. So to say that I know every nick and cranny of this game would be a massive underestimate. You can play Albion on their own launcher, Steam and mobile devices, with some data miner leaks saying that it might come soon to console as well. As for player population, it currently stands at the average player count of 10,000, while in peak it can reach up to 27,000. And as I've said, they're still their own launcher and mobile players, which will count at least for 50% more of players. So for the true player count, we can double the Steam numbers. Then if you want to quickly look into the game itself, Albion has pretty much anything you would want. You can gather, craft, go PvP, gank, go fame farming, which means just leveling and much more. Every single thing that you can use in the game is player crafted, so for the economy players, you can make this game a full-time job. As far as beginner players and content goes, Albion has one of the most diverse content I've ever seen in any MMO. What I mean by this is that almost for every single player, there are specific made zones. So for example, for hardcore players, there are zones where there is full loot. And then there are even more specific full loot PvP zones, where only one other player can enter, so for 1v1s, 2v2s, 5 vs 5, 10 vs 10, 20v20, and even CVZs, which are 100 vs 100 player battles. And then on the other hand, for all of these activities, we have the same type of new player zones, where you can do the same things but not lose anything. So to say Albion has every single type of PvE or PvP activity you could think of would be 100% accurate. This game of course is not perfect, with pay to win being in the game, but as all know, PvP zones are gear capped, and full loot PvP zones are that if you die you lose everything, so pay to win has very little impact on the average player, but of course it still exists. Then next up we have Path of Exile, which of course will be put right in the S tier. Almost every single free-to-play MMO enjoyer should be familiar with PoE, but if you aren't, then here comes a surprise, because this is one if not one of the best polished and made PvE MMO games out there. And yes, if you paid attention, then Path of Exile is only for PvE. And actual PvP specific modes exist, but over time developers kept changing the game so much that they pretty much deleted the PvP from their game completely. And at the current patches, almost zero players even have heard that there is a player versus player combat possible. But if you can overlook this one for some big deal, then this game is definitely for you. Path of Exile is an online action RPG set in a dark fantasy world, with a focus on visceral action combat, powerful items and deep character customization. PoE is completely free and will never be pay to win, which over the years developers have proved this statement to be for the most part true. As this game is 100% PvE, so your gameplay loop will consist of killing monsters, which progressively will get harder and harder, so then in turn you will have to improve and upgrade your character. All of the Path of Exile's character classes share its vast passive skill tree, starting at one of the 7 distinct locations dictated by their chosen class. Players can focus on the core specialization of their class, or travel across the tree to build complex combination of skills from various disciplines. So overall, PoE has hundreds of builds and ways to play a character, and if you just take a look at the skill trees themselves, it will take hours for a new player just to understand what they are seeing on their screen. But that is what a lot of this game's core community loves. PoE is everything you would ever want in an MMO, just for solo PvE. For some, this sounds too good to be true, but for others, they need the PvP to actually make their time worth the grind. So this is the choice you have to make before trying out Path of Exile. And then finally, as far as numbers goes, this, in my personal experience, doesn't really matter as every single content is PvE and can be done solo, but just for the information, the average player count right now stands at 44,000, while in peaks it can reach up to 106,000 players. So then for the third game we have Guild Wars 2, which we will place right next to the PoE. Guild Wars 2 is an award-winning online role-playing game with fast-paced action combat, deep character customization, and no subscription fee required. Players can choose from a massive arsenal of professions and weapons, explore a vast open world, compete in PvP modes, and much more. I've personally played Guild Wars 2 for about 200 to 300 hours, and I would call it the poor man's World of Warcraft. Some people may find an offense to it, but that is just my opinion, which I actually would consider as a compliment. Guild Wars 2 has very similar complexity to World of Warcraft, which some players really have got used to. If PoE was a bit too hardcore for you, then Guild Wars 2 may be the perfect balance. This game was released in 2012, so the in-game graphics should not amaze you, but neither punish your experience. This MMO is one of those games which you can play, leave for 6 months and play again, and have not missed almost anything, because it's very casual friendly, which like per usual may be a con or pro depending on the player. If you are a new player, then this game will definitely offer you hundreds upon hundreds of hours of content, and this game has no pay to win, except that you have to pay for expansions. The same as with WoW, you get flying mounts, bunch of PvE and PvP modes, with dungeons, PvP arenas, open world PvP, PvE puzzles, parkour, and much more. If I would have to summarize Guild Wars 2 in few sentences, it would be that story is B+, lore is A, combat is A+, class design is A, open world content is A+, in-game, which is instant content, is B, payment model is A, and quality of life systems is C. This game is fantastic for its price, especially for casual players. But the game lacks polish and also basic features, which you may find in any other MMOs, such as a queue system for dungeons and raids. And lastly, we have the player numbers, which stand at 3,000 average and 5 to 6,000 at peak times. In my personal experience, these numbers are not great, but only will impact the endgame content and few PvP modes, so you will just have to wait a bit longer or have to make a pre-made party. So then moving over to the last and final S-tier free-to-play MMO, and it is Lost Ark. Some viewers may be surprised about this game, as it is known to be very heavy pay-to-win, but as it's very similar to PoE, so Lost Ark is all about PvE, then pay-to-win only removes some of the grinding, which is for me a fine trade, for a fun and polished free-to-play MMO. Lost Ark again is one of those games where I've put 500 hours or more, as few years ago I was covering this game daily, so I'm pretty much familiar with every single build and in-game design that there is. In a quick summary, Lost Ark is an MMORPG, and to be more specific, it's an isometric MMO with ARPG elements. Think of Diablo 4 or Path of Exile, add a bit of League of Legends combat, and this is what we get. If you see this game for the first time, you may be put off by the isometric style, but don't worry about it, because this is a highly polished experience. The combat is punchy, it has a weight to it and very satisfying. Heavy hitting classes like the Artillerist use rockets, barrages and turrets to destroy waves of mobs. Or perhaps you would like to use a slick and highly mobile class like the Deadblade that will dash and slice their way through elites and bosses. Even if you're not a big fan of the games like Path of Exile, then Lost Ark is still worth a few minutes of your time, because the sound design, visuals and impactful mechanics of each class are really at the top of the charts. For me personally, PoE is a bit too hardcore and extreme, so Lost Ark really has its nice balance, where again it's mainly 99% PvE, but with a lot of less complex skill systems and learning curves. But with that said, Lost Ark does have a bit of PvP community, which are like 1% of the whole player base, so to say that it's 100% PvE would be wrong. But by PvP I mean a single 3v3 arena, where the queues depending on your server may be from 10 to 20 minutes. The biggest two problems with Lost Ark, and why it's not even more popular, is pay to win and the bots. So let me explain. Lost Ark is the most pay to win from all of these S-tier MMOs, because you can buy every single thing in the game, and as it's PvE mainly, so there are players who spend 50 hours and hundreds of thousands of real life money, and then there are other players with 1000 hours or more that have spent no money whatsoever, and they won't still ever achieve what the pay to win player has. Of course, again, it's PvE only, so how much you can tolerate, it's up to you. And then second of all, there are bots. And for some reason, Lost Ark has one of the worst bot problems in any game. They just seem to be in every corner of the game. It's hard to tell if Lost Ark is just easily exploitable or the developers just don't care. But when we look at the player count, the bot issue is so relevant that they account for around 30 to 50% of the whole player population. And this has been going on since the game's release. So, as far as the numbers goes, Lost Ark right now sits at 55,000 average, with going to 80,000 at its peak times. If we actually remove the bots, then the real player count is half of these numbers. It's not as popular as it used to be, but I've recently come back to the game for a few raids and dungeons, and I had zero problems with finding parties, so the population is still steady at the moment. So then moving over to the next game, which is Neverwinter, and we will place it right in the A tier. So Neverwinter is one of those old games, which most likely every single player has tried at one moment of their gaming journey, but it just won't refuse to die. My first encounter with Neverwinter was at the release back in 2013, me being big fan of Dungeons and Dragons, and all the previous games set in the Forgotten Realms. I really had high hopes for the release, and at the time it turned out to be a decent game, and ended up being a sort of secondary mmorpg to my main one, which was WoW. Neverwinter was fun to occasionally play with small group of friends, and maybe clear a few dungeons together. But then again, a few months ago, after decades of not playing this game, I was looking for a free MMO, since it's pretty pricey to afford WoW right now, so I stumbled across Neverwinter. I figured out it would be probably super dead with a sparse population, but I booted it up anyways to try it out, and I was surprised. There's still a tiny 1000 player community, which are devoted and everybody seems very nice. There's not really a lot of workaround or diverse gameplay, like go here, kill that, come back, go there, kill that, come back again and rinse and repeat, but it still has unique charm to it. There are of course microtransactions that are necessary if you want to speed up to run to the endgame content, but for people like myself who enjoy grindy games, it's really not that bad. Neverwinter is pretty basic, but they're still pushing out new content, and you always run into multiple players in every single little area. On top of all of this, there's a pretty straight path from beginning to end, so there's no real choosing of paths or higher RPG elements, which still can be fun for what it is, and I'm enjoying the time I spent. But it's probably not gonna be something I'm playing 5 years from now. So in my quick summary, Neverwinter is that fun free MMO that has a lot of grinding, outdated graphics, but you may be into that, heavy asset reuse in almost every zone, and very repetitive endgame tasks. So then for the next one we have Runescape, which I will place right in the A tier. Runescape is a fantasy, massively multiplayer online role-playing game released in 2001. I wasn't even born when this game was released, so the graphics and gameplay will speak for itself. RuneScape was originally a browser game, but largely replaced by a standalone client in 2016, so to say that even a $5 PC will run it would be a correct statement. In few words, this is Albion Online, just if it was made 15 years ago. One of the best things about RuneScape is that you are not tied to one class, so you can train melee, ranged or magic at any time and play whoever you wish. While I see the appeal of class system in games, it's really nice to see that some do not restrict what you can do within the game. While I appreciate the freedom that the game offers, I do really feel like RuneScape's combat lacks polish. There seems to be a desync between the animations and your hits landing, and I shrugged it off when I first tried it as a networking issue. But developers covered the issue in depth last year, and that is when I realized it was just how the game is designed. RuneScape is one of the oldest MMORPGs, and it has created a legacy for itself that many modern games can only hope to achieve. Both old RuneScape and RuneScape 3 are still very popular and have a very loyal fanbase even amidst high-profile releases in the MMORPG space. And then for the last and final A-tier MMO we have Warframe. Warframe is a dense game that I would describe as a tangled ball of yarn, made up for almost 11 years of updates, system reworks and content drops. Its different bits and pieces overlap and twist together in a way that can make it overwhelming to even think about trying to untangle it all. But it also means that there's almost inconceivable amount of deep and often extremely entertaining content to discover once you do. Its fast-paced and shooter mission structure can often have the same appeal as Diablo 4. So, you're rushing through maps while moving down waves of enemies, collecting powerful items and crafting materials along the way. But varied objectives, enemies and locations, coupled with non-stop waves of limited time events and special missions, means that there's always some unique twist to that loop. As well, by being constantly pulled to so many different ways, makes the Warframe a notoriously difficult game for new players to get into. Even after dozens of hours, it can be hard to make sense of what mission should you be completing, and what item should you be trying to collect. This is for better or worse a game that you're going to need a wiki to play, as nearly all of the info about where exactly to find specific crafting components or blueprints isn't directly available in the game. As far as player count goes, to my surprise, it's still quite popular, with 50,000 being the average and going all the way up to 78 or 80,000 at peak times. So if you were thinking about playing Path of Exile, but just with guns and in space, then this is the game for you. So then at number 8 we have EVE Online, which will be placed right in the B tier. EVE Online is the largest single short-space MMO of all time, with over 7,000 solar systems and nearly 20 years of rich player-created history, where anyone can experience everything from immense PvP or PvE battles, to mining, exploration and different industries. I first started playing EVE Online 6 months ago, after I was told about it in an in-game chat, in a different MMO. I was talking about the older games I miss playing, and the player told me EVE Online is still around. I guess some of the older players still play on it, so I decided to take a look. EVE Online seems to be a fun PvP game, where you are worthy of destruction from day one. Most other MMOs ease the player into the hot PvP slowly, but EVE throws you right into it. Here PvP is very present, and I think that players need to understand that you will lose a bunch of ships multiple times, and that's normal. Long trips in warp get redundant too fast, and one quickly learns that autopilot feature is never to be used. There are pointless amounts of beeps and lights without any meaning to the player, and excessive audio and visual notifications. But to sum up, overall this is a good game with some great players. However, it's not a great or unique game. It has more issues than I care to admit, but at least pay to win is very similar to Albion Online, where technically you can get everything from IRL money, but if you don't have enough skill and knowledge, you can easily lose it. So then for the next game we have Maplestory, which I will place right next to the EVE Online. Maplestory is a 2D side-scrolling mmorpg with cartoony graphics that feature over 40 playable classes. Most of the players are not playing the game because it's a good MMO, but rather because gameplay and platforming feels good. Music is amazing, feeling of progression is very neat, and it's easy to make friends. But as far as cons go, Nexon aka the developers have serious issues that they don't fix. The quote-unquote grind is real. So for example, I have over 300 hours in and I still haven't got to the hardest bosses. And finally, this game is very basic. So you press a button, kill a monster, get a reward and rinse and repeat. Maplestory is a game once brimming with a charm and adventure, but now languishing in the shadows of its former glory. While its still whimsical lore and engaging combat mechanics still offer moments of enjoyment, the game's potential has been squandered by years of neglect and mismanagement. Players returning to Maplestory after an absence may find themselves overwhelmed by the flood of rewards and incentives, which at least for me diminished the sense of accomplishment and progression. The game's mechanics, once balanced and rewarding, now feel distorted and diluted by excessive handouts and pay-to-win schemes. Then for our 10th MMO on this list we have Star Trek Online, which gets to be placed right in the B tier. Star Trek Online is a really good game, best Star Trek game available today. If you're not a fan of Star Trek, then you will most likely grow tiresome of the game. But for fans of the TV shows, get ready for an engaging experience. There are many different ships to choose from, customizable gear, and many more positive aspects of the game. Star Trek Online is free to play, but like everything else in life, if you want to go ahead, you have to do what some are not willing, which is spending cash to purchase upgrades. Graphics are not the latest and sharpest, but they're not horrible either. If you love Star Trek, then you must try this game for sure. But after 14 years, the game has been ruined by lazy devs and overall poor project management. Got it and stitched back together after so many times, the game is really fun up until a point, and then the cracks really start to show. Stories with dead end, advanced abilities that don't quote-unquote work as advertised, and a microtransaction store that would make you wonder why there aren't more games for Star Trek fans, because apparently they've got nothing but time and money to spend on video games. After you finish the most of the initial story, which for sure I would recommend for a Star Trek fan, the game gets a little loose with storyline and just comes off like insert an average modern sci-fi junk. Much like the Marvel's Adventures, the rest of the game, besides the story, just feels like an amped-up commercial to sell you more of their products just for now for the low price of $17 a piece. So I really do appreciate everyone for watching, guys, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any suggestions, feedback, or maybe you would place a different game in this tier list, then you're feel free to leave your comments in the comment section down below. And while you're doing that, please click like, subscribe, and enable that notification bell, so this way you could support the channel and not miss any more amazing content. With all this said, you have an amazing day and I will see you in my next video, so take it easy, peace.